Hey everyone, I'm Rachel here at Natural Tunnel State Park, and today I'm going to talk to you all about the basics of birding. So more specifically, some tips and tricks on how to identify those birds. And so in Virginia, we have over 400 species of birds, which means they can be found pretty much anywhere. And that also means that we can go birding pretty much anywhere. So whether it's taking a walk or going on a hike, while we're camping or boating, or even if it's from the comfort of our own home, whether it's on our back porch or viewing those birds through our window. And so today, I'm going to share with you all some hints on how to identify those birds, and then I'll take you all on a virtual bird walk with me, and we will identify some of those feathered friends in real time. When birding, coloration is one of those features that we're usually pretty observant on, mainly because visually it sticks out to us. When you think of a bird that's blue, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Maybe a bluebird or a blue jay? Well, bluebirds and blue jays aren't the only birds that are blue. The same goes for our cardinal with the reddish coloration, or the goldfinch with the goldish yellow hues. And so while coloration is worth noting when you're birding, there's more to it than just color. And what if I took coloration out of the equation completely? Could you still identify that cardinal or that bluebird if it didn't have its color? And sometimes when we're birding, the lighting can get in the way, and it creates a silhouette or a dark shadow on our bird. So it's really hard to tell when it's just dark. So this is where my next few tips and tricks will come into play. So when we're out birding, one thing to note is the size of a bird. For me, I use a scale as reference to roughly gauge the size of the bird that I'm trying to identify. So I ask myself, is it smaller than, larger than, or about the same size as a sparrow, a robin, or a crow? So if it's smaller than a sparrow, it could even be a warbler of some sort or a kinglet. If it's bigger than a crow, it could be a hawk, or an eagle, or an osprey. And so this is a helpful tool to use when you're trying to identify the size of your bird. However, sometimes the size of the bird can be hard to estimate, especially at longer distances. And so this is when we can take the shape of the bird into account. When it comes to observing the shape of a bird, there's several different features to look at. One is the shape of the body, whether it's more rounded like the mourning dove, or is it more of a slender body? Making note on whether it has these tufts of feathers at the top, or if it doesn't, is a really good feature to identify certain species. Is the tail feather short or is it long? Some birds have tail feathers that are a really obvious feature and help identify it. The cardinal is a good example. The mockingbird and the brown thrasher also have pretty prominent tails that are good identifiers. Is the beak long or is it short? Sometimes when we are observing birds and we can only see the silhouette, we can still make out the beak shape. So is it shorter, kind of like this rose-breasted grosbeak, or is it pointier like the Baltimore oriole? So once you've taken note of the size and shape of your bird, observe any of the field markings. So these are basically designs on the bird, like a color or a shape that can be distinct and stick out and really help identify a particular species. So does it have any stripes? If so, where? Is it on the wings or the tail? And are these stripes a certain color? So this is a good example of the Baltimore oriole. It has some striping on its wings, and it has some really bold coloration on its front. And my fourth hint for you all today is to simply just observe their behavior. Birds have personalities just like you and I do, and the more you observe them, the more you'll start to see that personality really shine through. So take note of whether a bird feeds on the ground or does it feed up in a tree? Does it bob its tail like the eastern phoebe? Does it get along with other birds? Some wrens and mockingbirds have quite the personalities. Does it move up and down the tree bark like a nuthatch? And so these are just behaviors to take note of, and they really help identify what bird you're looking at. Also take note of the habitat you're in. So a red-winged blackbird is often found near wet or marshy habitats, and a red-eyed vireo is most likely to be found singing in a tree canopy in a forest, and very rarely would they ever switch. And so habitat is also key when identifying birds. Alright, so with those hints in mind, I'm going to take you all on a virtual bird walk to some of my favorite places in the park to go birding. And so I will give you all a view through the lens of my binoculars, and we will ID some of the birds at Natural Tunnel State Park. So let's head out. So the first place I wanted to take you all was to our birding and wildlife trail. It's one of my favorite trails at the park, and it has some beautiful views at the top near the gazebo, but it also has some really great open fields and then some really good forest edges, which is great for birding. And so we will head on out and see what birds are out and about. One of the first birds I noticed right out in front of us in the field is an American goldfinch, and he is bright yellow, so he really sticks out right now. The male is bright yellow with black wings and a black head, and the female is more of a lighter yellow or olive shade. And so when we think of birds that are yellow, usually the goldfinch is the first to come to mind. But with this little guy, we're actually looking at a prairie warbler. And they have not as bright of a yellow, but it still pops out. And they have a little bit of orange. And so here is one of the more common birds, and it's actually the state bird of Virginia. It's the northern cardinal. And the male is bright red and vibrant. And it has some black at the base of its beak. And the female is pretty much a more dull brown color. And so like I mentioned earlier, there's more than one bird out there that's red. And so what we're looking at right now is the Scarlet Tanager. So it is completely red, except for it has some black on its wings. And that's how you distinguish it from the cardinal. Out in the distance, straight in front of us on this tree, is a red-bellied woodpecker. And it's noticeable by its red head. On the back of its head, it's bright red, and its body is pretty much a tannish or brown color. And it's our medium-sized woodpecker, the pileated. If you think of Woody the woodpecker, is one of our larger species. And then, of course, this one is our Downy Woodpecker, and it looks very similar to our hairy woodpecker, but if you look at the beak size on the Downy, it'll always be a little bit smaller and shorter compared to the hairy woodpecker. So what we're looking at here is an Indigo Bunting, and it is a solid bright blue if it's a male. If it's a female, it's more of a tannish brown color. And of course, the reasoning behind that is females want to blend in when they're sitting on their nest to protect their eggs. And of course, the males have those more vibrant colors to attract a female in the springtime. So I have stumbled upon two eastern phoebes, and they have recently fledged their nest. And so mom and dad are not too far by, and they do still feed them, but until they can get strong enough to learn to fly on their own, they will hang out on the ground because they're a little bit too big for their nest. Eastern phoebes are grayish in color, so it doesn't really stand out as much, but one good way to identify a phoebe is if it's resting on a tree limb or a branch of some sort, it'll always bob its tail, and that is an easy way to identify a phoebe, especially if you see it from far away. This is one of my favorite birds. It's the hooded warbler, and it gets its name because it looks like it's wearing a little black hood on its head, but it's bright yellow in color, and like most warblers, they tend to hang out in the treetops and feed on insects found in the trees, and they don't sit very still for very long, and so they tend to hop around quite a bit. So this is a chickadee, one of the more common birds you may find in your own backyard. One of the easier ways to identify it is by the black mask on its head. It's not a very big bird, a little bit smaller than a sparrow. You'll often find these birds hanging out or flocking with other bird species, whether it's a nuthatch or a titmouse, and so it's not uncommon to see them with other birds. So this guy was hanging out in the tops of the trees, which is pretty common for this species. It is our Baltimore Oriole, and the males are vibrant orange with a black head, and the females are more of a yellow color. So this is an eastern Touhey, and it's really easy to identify, especially here from a distance, by its really long tail. And it has a jet black head and more of a rusty brown on the sides. And the female looks a little bit different. It just has more of a brown shade versus that jet black that the male has. And so they typically sing from the tops of trees, and they will often visit feeders too. Up in the tree above us is the Carolina Wren, and it's a fairly small bird in size, but it has a personality that definitely makes up for it. But it is easy to identify by its rusty brown color, and it also has a white eyebrow and a tail that is almost as long as its body, and it typically sticks upward. And so if you can see that in the distance, that's a good way to identify that bird. Here we have our eastern bluebirds. There's actually a pair, and so the male is more of a vibrant blue, while the female is more of a light blue to grayish color. Easy way to distinguish this from maybe the Indigo Bunting is the bluebird will always have that rusty color on its front. We actually lucked out today and found a bluebird nest. They are cavity nesters, and so they will oftentimes make their nests in hollowed out trees, or if you have a bluebird box, they prefer that hollow cavity to build their nest. One of the more common or widespread species of sparrows is the song sparrow, and that's who's singing for us right now in front of us. And an easy way to identify this species is by the rusty brown streaks that go down its front. And so their habitat can vary from open fields to along stream banks, and so their habitat is pretty versatile. One of the tiniest birds that we have is our hummingbird, and this is a ruby-throated hummingbird. The male has that black or ruby throat, and the female will not. And of course, if you put out hummingbird feed, they will definitely come and visit. And you don't need anything fancy. You can make your own homemade feed. It's 4 parts water to 1 part sugar, and all you do is boil it and put it in the feeder and just change it out regularly so it doesn't get any bacterial growth. So today we saw about 17 species of birds, which was pretty awesome morning for birding. The best way to get to know those birds in your backyard or to get better at identifying them is to practice. And so just go out and bird for maybe 15 minutes or so, journal about it, make notes about some of those identification hints that I had talked about earlier. And of course, if you put some feeders out, that'll always attract birds too. And of course, there's some awesome field guides and birding apps out there. Peterson, Audubon, and Sibley's, just to name a few, are some really great resources. And the Merlin Bird Id app is the one that I personally use. It's a free app, and you can set it to your location, and it takes you through the entire identification process, and it'll narrow it down to just a small handful of potential birds. So today I gave a few hints on how to identify birds, whether it was by coloration, their shape and size, their behavior, or the habitat in which they live. And on our virtual bird walk, we were able to see a variety of birds that call Natural Tunnel State Park home. However, I did leave out one identification tip, and that's identifying birds by their songs or their calls. And that one just takes a little bit more practice. So in my next program, I'll give a few tips on how to bird by ear. So stay tuned, but in the meantime, I hope you all feel inspired to go out in your backyards and see what birds call your backyard home. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see y'all next time.